Have you checked the children? Your little master.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the towers, Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you join me here for a bit of palaver, some special this time on Hail! Ooh, yeah! Stephen King, Terezi, obviously, Bevaninos, and welcome to the horror show. And this is a special Hail to Stephen King, as I mentioned, because it is a patron request. Patreon, support us in the linky things below if you feel so inclined and kind. But yes, Heather Smith has been putting me through the trenches with the Children of the Corn direct-to-video sequels, which were put out, Dimension by way of Miramax, I think, is how after The Final Sacrifice, which was the second film released in the early 90s and the final one that actually went theatrical. So after that, they're like, yo, let's just throw a tiny bit of money at these and let's just crank the motherfuckers out. And that is what they did throughout a good chunk of the 90s and I believe into the early 2000s as well. And so previously, so we did Children of the Corn 1 and 2 together, myself, Marsha Parker, and Cecil, but that was a number of years ago, and we had the intention of continuing along and just kind of knocking out two at a time because, let's be fair, these films, at least for me, aside from the Sci-Fi Channel remake that they did in the aughts, none of these films are particularly memorable, and so we were like, let's tag team them, do them two at a time, and yeah. That never ended up happening, so I have to extend a grande gracias, obviously, to you, Heather, for making sure that we finally get her done, so to speak. But in the previous installment, I had the pleasure of taking a look at Urban Harvest, which was the third installment and the first to go direct-to-video. I had seen that one a couple times previously, but then I watched the fourth one, which I think was called The Awakening, if I remember correctly. The Gathering, derps, okay. But that one had Naomi Watts, and while neither of those films were anything to write home about, anything that amazing, I still enjoyed them for what they were. In The Gathering, Naomi Watts is great. It was her first starring role. They paid her like just a couple $1,000s for that. A couple decent kills, a little bit of meta humor, and Urban Harvest, while really goofy with some of the stuff that they do taking place in the Chicago area, if I remember correctly, although it was California doubling as Illinois, it doesn't make any sense. But so that film had some good kills though, and had a big finale with a crazy creature and whatnot. So I will at least give those two, while not being great films by any stretch of the word, I was entertained. I really was. If you go in the right frame of mind and maybe with the slightest bit of mind-altered inebriation, I think that you can have some fun with those two films. But these next couple, that's where I think that I'm not going to say lost their way because, I mean, did they really have the best path to begin with just cranking these sequels out direct to video? I don't know, but so let's get to it. And just a reminder, yep, I've got all of these on a 6-film set. And the reason I have no qualms with this is yes, there is I believe it's Arrow Video put out a deluxe version of Children of the Corn 3 Urban Harvest, which has a bunch of supplemental material. But aside from that, which I'm probably going to have to track down being a King completist at some particular point, none of these have any sort of supplemental stuff as you go deeper into the series. And so, I mean, no commentary, no behind the scenes, nothing. They are, for the DVD, Blu-ray, 4K collectors, they are what we describe as bare bones, so to speak. So you just have the film. These don't even have friggin' closed captions, man. So, and I have, at the behest of Lady Catherine, really grown to prefer watching films with closed caption on, just in case something is rather inaudible, or there's a thick accent or whatever. And also, I have no issues with that because I watch a lot of foreign horror and other sorts of cinema, and so subtitles don't bother me. I feel like even in English language, they enhance the experience provided they're accurate. So with all of that aside, let's talk the 5th film, Children of the Corn 5. Fields of Terror, I think, is the subtitle. And this is one that there's actually a decent amount of talent behind it. Now, not like top tier or anything, even for the horror industry, but nonetheless, this film, which was released on June 21st of 1998, had some big names that would go on to stuff, and also, from the, cinema past. And so you've got Eva Mendes, and she's not the final girl, so to speak, but she is in this in her first feature film. It's lots of close-ups on her pretty face, and she doesn't really have a lot of dialogue or anything. And that's one interesting thing about this film. It's very scant on the dialogue, and that is courtesy of none other than the writer-director Ethan Wily, who he worked on a lot of different things in like the 80s, and he's probably best known for mostly genre work, but he's probably best known for writing the script for the Steve Miner film. I think it's Steve Miner, The House, Ding Dong You're Dead and all that, the one with Norm, and it was, kind of goofy. But then when they did House 2, The Second Story, which is reviled by many in comparison with the original film, because the original House, it had scares, it had laughs, whatever, but the second one just went full balls to the wall with its goofiness, and Ethan wrote and directed that. And he did some other things. If you try to, look at his IMDb, it's not heavily populated or anything. But in 1998, he wrote and directed this fifth Children of the Corn film. And so the aforementioned Eva Mendes as the other, well, not the other, there's technically 6. I think they're college students. Maybe they're teenagers. I don't know. They definitely look like college students, even if they're masquerading as is typical in Hollywood as teenagers. But so, nonetheless, aside from Mendes, you also have David Carradine in this, Kung Fu, yo! And also Fred Williamson is in it, and you even get a cameo from Kane Hodder as a bartender. So, yeah, there is, and Alexis Arquette, rest peacefully, who's actually pretty funny in this. And, it was a sad end to them, because, Alex, and then I think transitioned to being Alexis, but, passed away from HIV complications from it after struggling with it for, I think, well over a decade. But some funny lines in this, and I believe some intentionally funny lines, and then others that are just like facepalm sort of shit. So this is definitely in contention for, at least thus far, having only watched the first 6 films and then the remake and then Runaway, this is in contention for maybe the goofiest of the Children of the Corn films. And so, yes, you've got these college kids. I'm just going to keep saying college kids because of the age in which they look. But so they're driving through some cornfields and they come to this abandoned town. And I'm trying to remember if they even mention the name of the town. It does not look in any way, shape, or form like Nebraska or even Kentucky, where they filmed the second movie that I'm going to be briefly talking about here for Heather Smith's patron request. But I mean, there's a couple scenes where you can you notice the palm trees in the background. But yeah, so it's a relatively deserted town, but there are still adults in it, which goes kind of against everything Children of the Corn epitomizes, because they're supposed to kill all the adults. I mean, there's supposed to be nobody that is alive after the age of 19, and yet David Carradine is playing this character, Luke, I think the name was, but inconsequential. He is like a puppet master of a bunch of these kids that is led by a little ginger named Ezekiel, who he's not very good in this. I recognized him from a bunch of late 80s, early to mid 90s stuff, because he was one of those, redheadish child actors. I think he was on like Picket Fences for a number of years, but he's the main evil kid in this that you see at the very beginning of the film, gets possessed by He Who Walks Behind the Rose. There's a fire going on in the cornfield, and there's like this green, like zappy, almost like lightning sort of thing that jumps in his eyes, and he gets possessed, and then he goes home and kills his mother and father. What happens with the father is actually not bad. The crazy little creepo kid elevates his father, and it's during like a rain and lightning and thunderstorm. And he has the lightning go as his father is elevated and zap him and like turn him into a crispy critter. So that bit is actually not too bad, not terrible effects, but really throughout the rest of the movie until we get to the like finale, the climax of sorts, where things finally happen, because the middle of this film drags, nothing happens. But even when we do get the very occasional kill at the beginning, and then even in the end, it's a lot of like camera cutaway stuff. There's this dude who has blow-up dolls for whatever reason, and he's driving with his lady friend, I presume, and he's got inflatable sex dolls that he's like leaving around at some of the town markers and stuff. It's really, really cheese, but there is some death that happens early in the film, and it cuts away from these characters being stabbed up, and it like cuts to just blood splashing on ears of corn, and that's where you're like, okay, you didn't have a budget for practical gore effects, really, and so, or you at least saved it for the couple scenes where they actually don't look too terrible. But yeah, man, I mean, as I kind of peruse the notes and stuff that I had, as I mentioned, cutaways, but the goofiness of some of the dialogue and why this is maybe the silliest of the Children of the Corn films, aside from a few moments in Urban Harvest. There's a bit where this dude gets stabbed through the chest with, like, a scythe or a sickle or whatever the hell they call them, that they, like, use in the cornfields to kind of, shave down some of the taller stalks and whatnot. And he looks down at this piece of metal that has impaled him, and he's like, that's not right. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. I know it was deliberately trying to be funny. So it's so bad it's good. Yeah, I guess dumb dialogue like that. There's another bit where dude is like, you'd think there'd at least be a 7-Eleven at the end of the earth, because he comes in, our college kids come into this just total ghost town of a place, and yet all the locals are like, you need to go, you need to go, you need to get the hell out of here. And you do kind of get the vibe that the reason they're trying to get them to leave is because they know there's this evil crop of kids that David Carradine's character is kind of domineering over and presumably manipulating. You eventually find out the truth, but our final girl in this, I don't remember her name, inconsequential, Stacy something if I remember, but she was somebody who did a lot of smaller supporting work on sitcoms and a couple features and stuff like that, but this was her first and only starring role, and she apparently ended up, despite the fact that she was relatively well known, more notably from her TV work, that this was her only feature because of the fact that she eventually retired from acting, saying that she had a learning disability and couldn't remember her lines. So I don't necessarily know if she just sucked at remembering things, or if there was an actual learning disability and she just had that trouble recalling. But after I read that on Wikipedia, and I was watching her throughout this, most of her lines are just like one or two at a time, and then there's a cutaway. There's a lot of scenes where she's just sitting or like reading from books and whatnot, because you start to peel back the layers and you find out about Ezekiel and all of the kids, and also that our lead final girl's brother has actually taken in with this cult of kids worshiping He Who Walks Behind the Rose. So underutilized David Carradine, underutilized Fred Williamson. I mean, King Hodder, as I mentioned, those are like horror / like genre royalty, so to speak, but they're really in the film for very little. Alexis Arquette is really the one that stands out to me of all of our characters in this. Has some funny lines, decent acting. I mean, from the Arquette family, Patricia and, David Dewey Arquette, Doofy. So, yeah, can we talk about this as a line that Alexis bats out as there's a bunch of kids trying to kill him, because it's still he at the time and everything. But it's, from a directorial standpoint, a very strange effort by Ethan Wily, because he does these weird, like, not like Dutch tilt, but like these full-on tilt shots, like these like completely like alternate, like 90 degreeing the camera, so to speak. I think that's the proper dimensioning, and it's like complete sideways looking. I'm like, what is the point of this? Very weird. And then lots of just lingering close-ups. Like, I know that Eva was and still is, a very lovely lady and everything, but a lot of these, like, just frozen on the face and just lingering and not even cutting away or anything, just stuck on the face for like 10-15 seconds, and a stern, sullen expression, and then finally we get a reaction. So there's a ton of that, which I just did not understand, but we do, at least as the film nears the conclusion, we get a few cool bits, and you can tell, as I said with the lightning kill at the very beginning, that there is at least a moderately compelling bit where we get revelation about one particular character whose head splits, and then there's like this, like, I don't know, smaller head mutiny demon fire spitting thing that's in the cracked head that does away with the character by spouting fire that blasts through the skull and like right through the skull, so you can see right through the face and everything. That wasn't too bad. We get when the town finally decides to help the kids after them imploring for a while and trying to escape, to no avail. Yeah, it just... I don't know. There's some cool stuff with these firefighters trying to extinguish this silo where there is like this flame that's being used at the very bottom. It's like kind of an ongoing fire. There's sacrificial stuff going down there. I don't know. It's all convoluted. It's all silly. Our final girl does, at least from, even though she's not really riddled with a lot of dialogue, once she finally takes charge at the end of the movie, she's not too bad. But then we get to this, this epilogue-y sort of thing with a particular character who is pregnant, who decides to give up their child for really no reason to another character who doesn't really look too much older than her. And of course you have the twist ending where there's something with the child that hints at whatever more. I don't know. That's about as much as I want to say, Heather, about Fields of Terror. And so yeah, there's your sign, so to speak. So now let's jump into the second part of this patron request, which is none other than Children of the Corn 666, Isaac's Return. Yeah, Isaac's Return. John Franklin, who played Isaac in the original 80s film with Linda Hamilton, that is. He comes back for this film. And dare I say, I enjoyed this film. Now, I did not enjoy it for the gore factor, which I feel like, The Final Sacrifice, the second film, as far as from a gore standpoint and from a tone standpoint, is definitely one of the weaker ones, whereas at least Urban Harvest did something different and had some very solid kills and the big creature at the end, even if it looked kind of shitty. And then I will at least say The Gathering, the fourth one with Naomi Watts, had some decent kills. Fields of Terror, which we just talked about, I guess there's a couple. This one definitely has the weakest of the kills. However, this has, in my estimation, the best story since the original, I think 84 was when the first one came out, Inconsequential. The first adaptation of Children of the Corn, not including the Disciples of the Crow, which was the Dollar Baby. But Isaac's Return, John Franklin all grossed up, but did not die at the end of the original film. They decided to retcon that and say that his character has actually been in a coma for those 19 years. And there is this character by the name of Hannah who has decided to go back to Gatlin. Yeah, we actually go back to Gatlin proper as opposed to a neighboring city, or as opposed to Chicago, or as opposed to places that don't even identify themselves, like in Fields of Terror. And from a story standpoint, once again, the double down, not from a kill standpoint or a gore standpoint, but from the tale that they decide to tell here, which John Franklin actually wrote the script along with his writing partner, Tim Solka, who he had done two, I guess they were shorts, but I mean, they were in the 40-minute range or whatever, but there's two other IMDb credits that John Franklin wrote along with Tim, but they wrote this script together, and it's not bad, because it actually directly connects with stuff from that original film, most notably with the characters of Amos and Rachel. So if you remember, Amos was the guy in the original film who was turning 19 and was essentially the sacrificial lamb, and they carved, into his chest, and, the blood drinking and all that craziness. So, and Rachel survived, and Rachel in this is still in Gatlin and is played by none other than Nancy Allen. Yeah, Nancy Allen, former wife of Brian De Palma, who she obviously got acquainted with when she was in De Palma's Carrie film. So there is a king connection here of a pretty royal regard. And she was also in, Dressed to Kill, I think was the film where she was the hooker who saw the murder take place, another De Palma film. But yeah, she is in this as a grown-up version of Rachel, the character who's, who she was betrothed to Amos, who was sacrificed, and she's pregnant, and she had a kid. And her kid, and this isn't like a big reveal or anything, because they hint at it pretty much throughout, most of the film early on once you're introduced to the Rachel character. So I guess minor spoilers, but yeah, Rachel and Amos had a child. That child is Hannah, and Hannah is back in Gatlin trying to get some information about who her biological parents were. And as she returns, a prophecy is fulfilled. That is, Isaac awakens and basically mobilizes the children again. But a cardinal sin that this film commits, just like the previous one, is that the adults are allowed to live in Gatlin, even at the, awakening from this 19-year coma of Isaac. Because the entire town is like kind of in on it. The law enforcement is in on it, the major local doctor is in on it. So I don't know why that was stricken from the record about the fact that, because there's still there's characters in this who are reaching their age of sacrifice of 19, which I think they switched in the previous film to 18, which I thought was kind of a head scratcher, but they're back to 19 proper, and, you know, King's beloved number, mine as well, and yet it just was a real head scratcher. The fact that the adults are, I guess from a cover-up standpoint, maybe that's really the only logic that I could give to this, but the fact that there is the connective tissue, the fact that John Franklin returning, he's actually good. He's good in this. He's creepy. And that's where I actually will say that I'm glad that this film, like, man, Children of the Corn 2 Final Sacrifice has some goofy moments. 3 really has some goofy moments. 4 is a little more on the serious side than, you know, The Gathering, the one with Naomi Watts. But 5 goes right back into gooftastic status, although I don't necessarily know if it was always intentional. But this one is relatively devoid of humor, and it's, dare I say, pretty good. Now, if you're coming to these for the kills, you're going to be disappointed. Aside from the fact that they overuse the whole, she's seeing visions, and, you know, what is real and what is not, and, you know, visions and dream sequences. It's one of the most overused horror tropes, and the fact that Hannah thinks she's seeing dead bodies. She picks up this street preacher at one particular point, and he's, like, explaining her name or whatever. So, at the very beginning of the movie, she thinks she's, like, hallucinating, seeing dead body stuff for, you know, a brief period. And then there's also, it rears its ugly head later in the film where she's investigating a grave and all this other stuff. So, it is a trope that's overused, but aside from that, we don't get a kill. So you see bloody dead people here and there, but as far as something actually happening, Isaac doesn't take his first victim until over 40 minutes in the movie, and it is lame as fuck. There's water. That patient in this hospital where Isaac was in this coma for all these years, who is very obviously mentally unstable, Jake or Jacob or whatever I think was the name of the character. There's water on the floor, and there's a particular character that steps in the water, and yet how many times have we seen the electrocution? But it's been done so many times better when you end up with, you know, the term I used earlier in part 5, a crispy creature, man. There's nothing. The dude just flails about, and then he's down on the ground. You barely even, like, see any steam or anything. There's no, like, burn marks on the body, really. It's just, it's a cheese dick kill. Really stupid. But that's where I will say, if you're coming into this expecting really good kills. Now, there is a bit when there's some characters being sacrificed, because you do find out that Isaac has a son. Ironically enough, I'm not sure who his character, you know, had the horizontal polka with, but nonetheless, it apparently happened, because not only did Rachel and Amos have a child, but Isaac, you know, procreated as well. And there's a reveal about one of these new children of the corn, you know, worshippers of he who walks behind the rose, being his son. And so I'm not spoiling that. I'm trying to keep these as spoilery free as possible, obviously, Heather, and for anybody else from the Hail to Stephen King quartet and here on the Horror Show watching this. But yeah, you find out that there is one of them, and there is also another character by the name of Gabriel, if I'm not mistaken, who becomes the love interest of Hannah. And I will say that this is a directing improvement. Okay, you know, besides Nancy Allen and John Franklin, there aren't any really, like, big name horror people like we had in those smaller roles in the previous film. But, and the actress who plays Hannah, she's fine. You know, she was in, like, Cruel Intentions 3, so she was not like an esteemed person, even in the horror community, so to speak. We're talking like a direct-to-video lady, and, you know, that's about it. She's okay, but really the biggest name in this, at least at this particular point, is the director, who is Carrie Scogland, a Canadian woman who... She did a couple features, nothing really of note. This is probably like her most noteworthy feature, at least as far as the Stephen King brand and the film's association with that. But big-time TV director. So tons of genre work, including some King connections. She did a couple episodes of the Under the Dome series for CBS. She did Nosferatu, a couple episodes of the series based on Joe Hill's book. She did Fear the Walking Dead, The Walking Dead. She did some episodes of The Punisher when that series was on Netflix with Feel the Bernthal. You also had, since she did Handmaid's Tale. So she did tons and tons of genre work over the years, and most recently, her biggest thing and claim to fame is the fact that she directed all 6 episodes of Disney Plus's Marvel show Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So you can tell that compared to Ethan, who did the previous film, this is, at least from a directorial standpoint, a significant improvement, from lighting to shot choices and all of that. it's just a bummer that they didn't have much for the gore. I alluded to a kill once some sacrificial stuff is finally starting to go down. A character is cut in half, so it's filmed decently, but still, like, you see the cut and you don't see the aftermath, so they are still on a limited budget of trying to do some cool kills, but they don't have the money to really show it in any sort of awesome accord. I will criticize, though, that there's a weird usage of slow motion in a couple scenes in the finale, but then also in this sex scene. And I'm trying to remember if this is like the first Children of the Corn that had like an actual love scene. Now, granted, there's like bits with, you know, like romance and whatever, but as far as like an actual love scene, it's done in this weird, like, slow-mo-y, just, it's very artsily done. I don't know how well it fit the proceedings or anything, but, you know, nonetheless, as I double-check my notes, I try not to consult them if at all necessary, because I just rewatched both of these last night. But I mentioned the reliance on the hallucination tropes. I mentioned Isaac splitting that particular character in half, which is one of the higher quality kills. There's also a few characters who shift allegiances and decide to take their own lives as opposed to being a part of Isaac's scheming, you know, just falling onto large blades and things like that. So that's at least cool. So by the time we get to the third act and there is some bloodshed finally transpiring, it's not bad. And I will say that Hannah is a significantly prettier and superior actor to the lady from Fields of Terror, who was the sitcom actress. So she's at least better. The actor who plays Gabriel isn't too bad. There's another one named Jesse who's in a few scenes, who has at least one in particular where he's got some banter with Hannah, which is amusing. And it's really one of the only times where this veers even to the slightest degree into the humorousness. But for the most part, Isaac's Return, Children of the Corn 666, takes itself relatively seriously. And I gotta say, you know, there is a song which is used at it's not the finale, but it's as we are venturing into the third act, where one particular character is kind of mulling what they want to do. And it's a track called Cernunos or Cernunos, something like that. I don't know, but it's from a band called Faith and the Muse, and they only play the song for, you know, maybe a minute, if even that. But it's got a badass industrial kind of vibe to it, and I purposefully, as opposed to immediately taking out this DVD, I was like, I gotta wait till the end credits to see who the hell played that song, because that shit's really badass. And sure enough, the song by Faith and the Muse, just to reiterate the name of the artist, pretty damn good. It's got like over 100,000 views on the YouTube where I tracked it down. So that track is good, and I'm surprised to say that this is one of the better Children of the Corn entries. Don't go in expecting a film that moves at a brisk pace or anything, or has, you know, some of the better kills of the franchise, but it's got some of the better acting and writing, in my estimation, of any of the entries that I have taken in thus far. So I extend a grande gracias to Heather Smith once more. Thank you so very much. Danke arigato merci to everybody else who was checking out this video. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to become a patron, jump on the link below. We appreciate the support. It helps us keep the lights on here, so to speak. And yes, I've been Jaime and Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube. This is going to go up initially on Patreon, but it will be migrating over to the proper public as a Hail to Stephen King episode that everybody can check out at some particular point. But yes, like, share, subscribe once it does hit the public domain, as opposed to the unlisted, which is where everything resides for our patron stuff. Greatly appreciated, everybody. Yeah, that's all she wrote, peeps. So until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, sin amigos, constant readers and viewers alike, say thank you. I hope we have been well met and share more of this palaver sooner rather than later. And until then, remember to stay scared. And in this case, I will actually recommend to watch Stephen King. But seriously, if you haven't read the original short story that dwells in the Night Shift collection, get on that shizzle, because we have another Children of the Corn movie coming, presumably, at some point this year.